This is the final video for the monochromatic project. Step number 3, which is refining your value block in, doing any blending, and just softening and cleaning up edges in your drawing and so on as you go through, because as I mentioned before, when I do the block in, I don't worry too much about making sure I've got great contour edges at that point. I'm mostly just trying to see my values, and I do minimal correction. So I started off, after I did the block in of the last couple things in here, I started off with working on refining this little cup first, because it's a fairly simple form, and I like to start off with something that's a little bit easier and then move into more complex things as I go. So in this case I used it's a Robert Simmons Sapphire. It's a soft-haired brush, and this is actually a watercolor brush, but it's really nice as a blending brush, and I like using it. You don't have this. What you have instead is the Egbert or the fan blender. So take out your blender. You don't want to dip it in oil. You want to keep as little paint on it as possible. So you never pick up paint with your blender. You always place paint with your other bristle brushes. All you do with the blender is softly skim it on the surface and try and use the very tip of it to very softly and gently blend away any of your brush marks, soften your transitions of value and things like that. As you're working with the blending brush, you're going to want a little rag, like a terry cloth towel is really best, because the texture is really good for getting between the bristles a little better. But you use it a little bit and then you wipe it off. Then you use a little bit and you wipe it off. You want to keep it as clean and dry as possible, and then it'll do the best job of blending. I realized I wanted to put a little bit more light on this, so I picked back up one of my paint brushes and blocked some light into the top of that cup, and built up some of that roundness of the volume there. And then after I did that and kind of worked some of that back in, I went back underneath and hit some of my reflected light, and I believe I hit a little bit of the core shadow here to kind of finish out these volumes a little bit and pop them up so you can see that got a little bit more finished. Sorry for the jiggly camera. That got a little bit more finished and resolved, a little stronger core shadow, and I cleaned up this edge just a little bit. This is the point when you're working on this that you start bringing out the small brushes, the blending brushes, and all that. I don't even touch those as I'm going through and blocking in my major values. I next started working through some of the different areas of drapery, and I'm going to skip past to areas you can see a little bit better, where I use the blending brush to kind of soften some of those transitions of value, to get rid of some of the brush strokes. I like some brush strokes to stay. I don't like getting rid of all of them. I like to feel the process of the painting, and you might like them really smooth down. I don't tend to like things that are really overly rendered. They don't feel like paintings anymore. So I like leaving some paintbrush marks, like in my lightest parts. I will tend to leave them, or to help build a volume out, like the corner of a drapery. But here what I'm doing is trying to get rid of any of the rough ones that detract from my value and light transitions within the main part of the drapery. And you can see I'm kind of cleaning back into some of my edges of the cast shadow. I'm going to put a little bit more light in some of these edges. I'm going to play a little bit with some of the values within the cast shadow themselves, and just try and get a nice feeling of a finished volume happening within those areas. I hit back in white paint when I need it, like here in some of these highlight areas. I brought back in some white paint with my regular painting brush, and then I go back and forth with the blending brushes and soften down what I'm doing, cleaning up edges as I go. So you can kind of see how this painting starts to resolve as I keep building through all those different values. And then trying to resolve some of these shadows a little bit more to what I want them to be. So I was hitting a little bit of reflected light into that. And then I'm going to hit a little bit more of the core shadow and so on in there to get it finished feeling like what I want. I believe the next thing after some of this drapery, I finished the bottom corner of the drapery a little bit. Sorry, it was getting dark outside. But I got some more of the light and finished some of the transitions, the blending on the tin can, as well as some of the blending in some of these areas of the drapery. I switched the angle just so you could see it hopefully a little bit better from where I was at, so my hand doesn't get in the way. And I wanted to get the still life in there as well for you. So let me move this bar a little bit. So now as you look, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to refine the tin can, so I'm getting some of the ridges that are in that little rusted tin can in there. And I turn it sometimes, like in this case, it's really hard for me to do ellipses side to side because of my shoulder issues, so I tend to move things sideways so that I can go vertically with my lines. And I'll just go back and forth, and I'm using, actually this is a good little trick for you guys. You can see that I'm resting my hand on another brush. I took one of my bigger long brushes and rested it on the edge of the canvas, and that allows me to steady my hand. You can buy a maul stick or make something with a dowel or whatever, but that's basically what artists tend to use, is something called a maul stick, M-A-H-L, to rest their hands. My entire painting is wet, so you'll also see sometimes that I'll just pick an area that I know I can repaint really easily, and I'll rest my pinky there to give my hand a little bit more steadiness, and then I just go back in later and I fix the painting of wherever I had my pinky. Not the best painting practice, but it works. So I just keep going through and trying to refine things on this tin can bit by bit. I was really working on like the edges and trying to get the final little reflected light and so on correct. And then I went around the top rim. I'm still not happy with the ellipse on the can. It's a little deep on the front. But I don't really feel like messing with the painting anymore, so I think it's at where it's going to be. I took a really fine, small, thin Robert Simmons sapphire, and I used that for my little ridgy lines and stuff. That's my detail brush, and that's what you would be using your detail brush for, is to go back in and hit some of these lights. Now just coming through and cleaning up edges behind it so that I can continue cleaning up the edge of the can as well as around it. I came through and started reworking the values behind the bottle to get the transparencies. So first thing I did was soften all the values, and then I realized I wanted to put the little ridge of fabric in right here, so because it's the front ridge of the fabric. So I added that, and then I started working the lights within the bottle, on the surface of the bottle. So I don't put any of those highlights generally in when I'm blocking in the initial values. I do that stuff after I've got the initial back values finished, and then I come back and I work on the front surface of the glass. And that's what I'm working on here, resolving that top little ring on the bottle, the highlights coming down the bottle, just making sure my edges are clean. I came back in the drapery behind it and really cleaned up those edges as well. Added a few little sparkly highlights in places that needed it, as well as here on the cup. And then went through and worked on the cardboard area of my still life that's right here in the painting, because I kind of like the texture. I will probably work on it a little bit more once the painting's dry and I can rest my hand better. And basically called it complete at that point. So what I wanted to do is, this is a photo of the painting. It's a lot easier to see than what you were looking at with the video. So you can kind of see some of the lights and so on that were put in. The cleanup that I try to do on the bottle, I still need to kind of come in and get a little bit more narrowness in some of this. The light should come in just a little bit more in here. Tried to kind of bring some of these lights and reflections on the bottle in. Here's the can. This is why I said it's too deep. It needs to be just a little bit more narrow. And you can see some of the little lights and so on in here, as well as the softness, but then building back up and letting some of the, I really like seeing some brush strokes, and the paint quality of really good oil paint is really beautiful. So I've left some of that here within the light areas of the drapery because that's just something I like. And hopefully that kind of helps you understand what to do with your painting.